Hello everybody. Thank you for inviting UNStudio to this year's IDS, themed Natural Wonders. And we will reflect on that theme through UNStudio's past and future projects. And future-proofing is something we believe strongly in it because it links to our integral approach on health, nature, technology and sustainability. UNStudio and UNSense, these are the two companies that we have closely working together on these projects. And we are standing here today in front of you, and we is...
Ben van Berkel, I'm the founder of UNStudio and UNSense.
Astrid Piber, partner. Looking at this picture, which actually shows Ben and myself 23 years ago, when we were celebrating the 10th anniversary of Van Berkel and Boss, because that's how the company was founded by Ben and Caroline Boss, reminds me on a young graduate that is longing for a challenging job and found it at UNStudio. And there is the architect that was internationally known, that's why I moved to the Netherlands, but that was really on the verge of becoming like internationally the building architect, starting to build projects in Europe, but also in Asia. When I started at Van Berkel and Boss, the company was 40 members strong. Today we are with 300 members of the studio in different locations in the world. And the nice thing about the team is that it comes from diverse backgrounds, diverse disciplines, and that the common denominator is our belief in the design methodology and how we can design for the future through that and by looking at projects in a very innovative way. We have, despite all the units that we have within UNStudio about product design, interior, urban, but also knowledge and futures, we do have set up a company, a sister company called UNSense, so that we can work on the whole built environment. The built environment that's physical, we do that with UNStudio, and the built environment that integrates technology. We do that with UNSense. Currently, we are having 4 office locations, so that's Amsterdam, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Frankfurt. And all these locations we have been setting up because we started gaining work in those locations. We started working in Germany in end of the 90s, and we started working in Asia 2003-04, and we have set up the studio in Shanghai 2009. Currently, we are looking to expand in Australia, but probably also Dubai. And yeah, who knows? We have done projects in Vancouver and Toronto in the last 2 years, and we have always really liked working with our clients here. And who knows? Maybe we are coming back to this part of the world. Our DNA and our key projects show a little bit the evolution of the studio. Like one of the first key projects has been the Erasmus Bridge in Rotterdam, really linking both parts of the city and also being a signifier of the expansion of the city of Rotterdam. It was one of Ben van Berkel's early works and completed 1994, and I think 1997 we started working on the Arnhem master plan. It's actually the project that I started working on within the studio, and it lasted for nearly 2 decades because it really involved lots of different parts of Arnhem. But the core piece is the central station and the transfer hall with this element of the column being the signifier for what we believe architecture as a navigational device could be, bringing in daylight, guiding people. We have used those techniques also on the third project that you see here. That's the Mercedes-Benz Museum. That is really like combining how you perceive the product of the car in a special environment designed for Mercedes-Benz, and making this experience of the museum visitor curated experience along a double helix. And a key project that led also to our expansion in Asia is on the right side, the Raffles City Hangzhou, which is a truly mixed-use complex of 400,000 square meters, so a sort of self-sustaining city block in a new development area of Hangzhou, really being the symbiosis of master planning, architecture, interior design, and combining a city within a city. But today, we are talking about future-proofing, and you've seen examples of architecture, interior, and products, and we will show them in the following. But it's also about future-proofing our cities. And of course, we are at a difficult moment in time, because we all know that there's something at stake with our planet, and we are in this current pandemic or post-pandemic situation that we want to get out from. And we know that social distancing has been the tool to avoid the pandemic to grow. And how can we, when cities are all about density, are all about people mingling, about different experiences, how does that work together with this idea about social distancing? Probably not that much. But what we humans need are humans. But we also need the planet. And I think that's where the idea of designing human-centric, like putting the focus on humans, but also designing planet-centric and linking it back to nature and health and creating a sustainable development of the world is very essential. Because after all, what is expected for end of this decade is that 80% of the world population would live in cities, which are responsible for approximately 70% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And where does that bring us in our planet? So I think in our design approach, what we are suggesting is to embrace nature and embrace nature holistically on all the scales that we are designing in, but in terms of an approach towards materials and selection of materials, but also an approach to circularity, like what can we reuse, what can we use better, and what can we improve. And after all, it influences how we think of design. And nature is important for both the human being, because our brains wouldn't work if we are not regular in contact with nature. And that's nature as nature, but also natural materials. And for the planet, if there wouldn't be nature, there couldn't be a healing process and there would be an imbalance. So I think as designers and people on Earth, it's our brief to respect that balance and improve that balance for a better planet and for a better human existence. So in the work of UNStudio, we have looked at embracing nature throughout the scales. Like we embrace nature, of course, on the urban scales by integrating it through parks and green areas. But we also have worked in our mixed-use projects to see on how can we densify them in a way that there's still enough space for nature. And of course, in our architectural project, we have integrated nature all the way long, also through making use of like areas in a good way, flexible use of areas, but bringing it even down to the facade of projects, to the balconies, but also bringing it into the interior of our projects. And I think that's what we want to show you in the following, how human-centric we are designing on the different scales.
Yeah, and one of the other things we strongly believe in is that UNStudio, in the collaboration with UNSense, it's a daughter company of the mother company, you could say, of UNStudio, is focusing also on smart technology, not alone, because we do believe that smart technology in the built environment is not really very clearly defined by many smart city concepts you hear of, but we have this belief that we need to give it a focus, that it is related to human-centric strategies in the built and not in the outdoor environment, but also in the indoor environment. That it is related towards health and flexibility and sustainability particularly. So this idea of that we use technology towards the more human-centric approach is essential in the way how we design our environments. So that it works with different qualities of the way how an interior, the architecture and the urban strategy comes together even in the products we design. So where architecture and interior products meet is where, for instance, you come into a place where you suddenly think, wow, how is it possible that this product is so highlighted more than anything else in architecture? For instance, when we designed the Mercedes-Benz Museum, I convinced the client to first look at all the qualities of product design and industrial design, as we know from, for instance, the Museum of Modern Art. So I invited them to look at the helicopter in the Museum of Modern Art, and when you walk into that museum, you can look up and then you suddenly see this helicopter hanging above you in this lobby space. And I argued, if this helicopter is hanging in a Museum of Modern Art, why could be not a car in a Mercedes-Benz museum be a product as we can see as an art object? And for that reason, the Mercedes-Benz Museum came for that argument also a museum where you can see the car almost as an high-end cultural object. As we can see in this image of the museum, the building does have a very unexpected, beautiful interior space with two spirals crossing each other while you walk through the museum. But the most important is that you see the car from different angles and different ways, differently than you would see it on the road. As almost as if you would see different sculptures and artworks in a museum. So this is where we believe in, that although with this human-centric approach, that we look also at the other end of the way how we bring in qualities in design, and maybe we do that also with a cultural edge, as I described before. And particularly that came together in a project like the Mercedes-Benz Museum. And what we believed was the most important in that museum was not so much the human-centric experience alone and the organization of this double spiral, but particularly that you could experience the car in different ways, that you would experience the history of the car by the storytelling through that one spiral and the experience of going through the museum. But there was another route telling you the collection of the different cars and typologies of cars you could see in that other storytelling of the brand Mercedes. But that you give architecture a cultural edge, that you give it a double reading, that you connect it towards technology on the other hand, and the human-centric is for us important, that you expand on the possibilities further and further of what architecture can do. But for that, of course, you need your specialists, you need to work with others together on getting the right intelligence in order to get the design as we want and as intelligent as we want into our in realization, better to say. So and that leads us to also product design. I mean, we have from the small scale to the large scale, we have always believed that testing ideas and bringing that to, for instance, objects of design, chairs, tables, the way how we design even objects for kids. We believe that it is important to work through that transscalar quality of design. What we see here is an active seating sofa designed together with Walter Knoll. Here the idea was that you could combine a straight up-sitting way of working even in the sofa with an almost chaise longue way of lying down in the chair into one, you could say a bench and designed in a double curve in this seating, and if you want, you can even with almost close to 24 different people sit in the sofa. But the uniqueness of this is that it is coming out of this experience of the way how we designed the museum. So the sofa was originally designed for the Mercedes-Benz Museum, but we took the object out, the museum, and luckily enough the client was interested to, Balteknol in this case, was interested to bring this product on the market, and luckily enough it became a wonderful success. But simply because it is so flexible and diverse in the way how you can use it. And that's what we learned from, again, the Mercedes-Benz Museum. So this idea of flexible density, health, and new types of organizational models, multifunctionality, and technology specifically is there where we work on lately quite a lot. When I was working with my students at Harvard, so already 5 years ago, and worked on this topic of health, we came to the most amazing concepts, particularly how unusual and difficult it was to discover how bad some of our indoor environments are. And as you can see on this slide, with the work and the booklets we produce with the students, we came to topics related to health here, had to do with 3 layers. We were fascinated here in the topic of health and the built environment, and that is social health, physical health, and mental health. And what we discovered in the designs we later on designed around this topic was that it is so important to bring people together, especially in a campus like this one at the SUTD in Singapore. We introduce here a lot of landscape to make it attractive that people meet here, walk around, and that apart from walkability, also social and knowledge exchange would activate this campus. And the idea was that here we didn't break up the campus into different faculties, with buildings in different faculties. But what we did was to introduce in one building different faculties in one structure, so that on the hallway or on the public spaces or semi-public spaces in the building, you would always meet every student from every other faculty. Or that the professors from the different faculty would meet in one building and that they would exchange knowledge. So we always believed that through organizational devices and innovation on that level, that you could rethink the way how you can bring people together, and that you can actually try there very hard to also make sure that you create a community strategy where people not only meet, but then that also they socialize with each other. And that brings me to the topic of physical health, so that you hide in a way here and there the elevators, that you make sure that people take the nice attractive staircases, and that you see each other, that you talk to each other while you walk on the staircase, and that you stimulate walkability, as I said before. And of course we made in this building clear that you can sit in different corners of the building, that you can not only sit together in a public space, but that you can also isolate here and there yourself if necessary to concentrate on your own work. So it's not so that everything is focused on interaction, but also the fact that you can sit alone and that you can isolate and concentrate as a student in this building is of course key as well. But let me go back to another product we designed, and this was something we did with Alessi. It is called the Doraf, and the kids wear we designed for them. Here the idea was also to stimulate that idea of education and kids, that you could change an furniture from a giraffe towards the dog, and that you could almost not identify so clearly in the beginning where you look at, but that was all to do with education and the way how you can learn kids to stimulate their imagination. And you see how happy I am even on this furniture, because I've always enjoyed this idea of the stimulation of imagination clearly, but also this idea that an object can always activate you in different ways.
when our product designs can stimulate imagination, it's very important that we are aware of what happened this year with the pandemic. Because in a way, we all have been starting questioning the old normal and looking what could be a more holistic approach to our projects. And I would like to start with one mixed-use project that we are working on, and it stands for several of our projects, because exactly in those projects we see how health on different scale levels can be improved. And it is on, for example, this development in South Bank. You see it on the podium, like that we are elevating a public space, that we are elevating a garden to the higher levels. But if you see on the right side, we are also introducing a green spine that vertically activates the building. And we are doing that also because there's an awareness that living and working might change. So what are the spaces and the connection to green, for example, that is really relevant for both? And it's a duality between what's happening on the outside of a building and what's planned inside the building. And how can you combine that, of course, not only with green, but also with public spaces, with giving people an extension to their living space, for example. And on top of that, as healthy urban environments, we try to create this value through sustainable measures. And it has to do with having good daylight, creating better air, having a cooling function, but also creating a biophilic moment to upgrade the experience of the users. And in that way, like, green is not the add-on to the project, but it really makes the spaces more safe and more healthy. Like in this elevated garden that we created in order to benefit from it, because it's such a high dense development that the ground floor was nearly fully built on. We did suggest something similar for a project in Vancouver, where it was, yes, about creating green space, but it was also about creating urban communities, like creating social places in the podium on different levels for new businesses to find their spaces and create a new local economy. And if we talk about residential, and our units are becoming smaller and smaller, it's really that people need to benefit from what they do in their leisure time and how that can contribute to well-being. So also there are natural materials, and the link to a natural environment has been really key. And it's not only in residential or working environment, it's also in the educational projects that we are doing, that we see that gathering spaces for students where they can share knowledge and exchange knowledge becomes really essential. So looking at sustainable measures, integrating green, integrating wood in the construction is essential for the well-being of the users.
So that brings me to the idea of flexibility and the infrastructure of prevention. As we know, we are now living in this 1.5 society, maybe in a temporary moment, but over the history we have seen that after these pandemics, we have learned how to plan and structure our cities in a totally different way, and particularly also our buildings. So the idea of health and work for us became more and more important over the years when we worked on this topic. For instance, how can we reduce sick leave in the built environment? How can we find strategies to use the most strategic air systems so that air would not roll, fresh air particularly in the interior, would roll not from one person to the other, but that the air would be like in an operation room in a hospital, would come out of the floor and that would then straight move into the ceiling so that air would be always fresh and that it would stay in one location. This is simply what we used in this building. Total fresh air that comes through each floor into this building on all the different heights within the structure. So with that, you are almost as if you are outside in an environment whereby you are inside the building. So this is a huge change we introduced in this organization of this building, whereby people became really, really happy when they stepped into this building. They smelled this fresh air. But particularly in the way how it was transported from the floor to the ceiling, made it possible that bacteria or any virus would not move from one person to the other. And that created a condition whereby we could also reduce down sick leave, close to 20% in the beginning we've heard. So this is the essence of the future of indoor environments, we believe, to work with the best environmental qualities and well standards related to air, the best acoustics, intelligent materials, circular materials, and that we have fantastic light conditions as well. But another aspect is flexibility. In this example of a project we did for the city of Amsterdam, we made sure that over the time this building, what is an office building, can be transformed towards housing. And this is necessary so that we keep buildings circular, that we don't have to demolish buildings over time and rebuild them. But like you can see in the plan here, this building is designed with an office layout, but also with an apartment layout, so that whenever necessary it could change into another building. So flexibility was always something we believed in, that it creates a condition of the way how over time you can transform buildings, and not only introduce that in office buildings or in apartment buildings, but also even in the home, like in this Möbius house, what we designed already in the beginning of 2000, whereby flexibility was even the ambition of the client to be introduced in the house, whereby the both members of the home were enthusiastic to have their own workspaces, that they could walk through the landscape almost like a Möbius structure, and walk within the way, so that as if they would walk into the landscape inside the building, clockwise, with the time and the season of the year and the day, you could say, through the house, and that always, while at home, you feel as if you are in another place when you move from one program towards the other part of the building.
If we talk about flexibility and building for the future, we need to think more in terms of building in wood, but also reducing CO2 emissions. And not only that, I think the idea of circular design is thinking about how to do things better and not less bad. So we need to strongly think about renewable resources. And that's why, for example, in one of our latest projects in Vienna, we have looked at a very hybrid construction and how an inclusive approach to architecture and interior can create a better integrated building that's hybrid wood and concrete construction. But if we stand still with this cradle-to-cradle approach, what it really means is, and it's still in the footsteps, because we have, for years, we have taken a material, made something out of it, and dumped it. So that's a very linear process to producing things. I think sustainability has taught us to think about how can we do that process, but use less water and create less of the CO2, so do it a bit better. But the idea of cradle to cradle essentially comes from creating a loop and saying that you reuse material, you recycle material, and you are never dumping material, but you create a cycle. And the idea of a circular economy around that is to create businesses that think in that way and create a thriving economy where we would go away from the linear process. But of course, it needs some time to evolve. And if you again look at the projects that we have done at UNStudio, I think one thing is that on an urban level and on a building level, we design for flexibility. And we look at modular solutions and also at solutions that can, like for retrofitting, that can be adaptable and that can be completely demountable. And we look at the same time on how we can develop new materials. We are doing research projects with bio-based window frames, bio-based walls, but also how can we integrate PV in a new way with glass. So all this research helps us to work on the project, but it helps to develop our knowledge in that field. And if you look at the different shear layers in a building, like the outer skin, the structure, the interior, and the decoration, they have a different lifespan. And for example, when a foundation is set to last much longer as other parts, then they follow a different replacement cycle. And I think that's where we as designers have to take these time frames into consideration. We have designed, for example, a mixed-use project that's fully developed cradle to cradle by looking at hybrid construction methods, but also looking at how the modular elements can be flexibly used as hotel, but also as residential spaces, but also looking at how the whole ground floor could become a sort of marketplace, linking different entrepreneurs of the area, linking it to the circular economy, and linking it to how the project would be upgraded. One part, if zooming in, like from the architecture to the interior, was to think in plug-ins. So we looked for the hotel rooms at different elements that could plug in for a certain lifespan. For example, the mattress in a hotel room or the cupboards have very different lifetimes. So you have to replace them after a certain time. And what do you do then with them? So the idea for the hotel room was to really bring nature in through the balcony space, but then also through the materials in the interior. And if you go down from the interior scale to the product scale, it's really about the look and feel of natural materials in our products, like these ones. And besides designing according to cradle, I think important part in our practice has been learning from how we can adapt buildings that no longer are technically working appropriate or not appropriate in use. How can we upgrade those buildings so that we can prolong their lifetime? And I think very often it has to do with like exactly the interiors, the facades, sometimes also the structure to upgrade, but very often it starts from the smaller scale. So we have looked at interior projects, for example, here for this digital factory, where we looked at the industrial building and how a very flexible working space for a digital environment had to create like a special interior for relaxation, but also for co-working and different co-working scenarios. We looked at how this digital performance changed and how we could create through this digital meeting and communication means also physical places, like this staircase that became a sort of auditorium to exchange knowledge and have discussions. Going from the interior scale back again, zooming out on the building, we had the chance in Seoul to work for a client that owns a headquarter building that was built in the 70s and that wanted a complete renewal of this project. And this was required because basically the technical lifetime of the facade, but also of the interior, wasn't adequate anymore. So we looked at the modularity of the facade, what would be the structural grid, and we updated a facade that was basically very horizontal aligned with a facade consisting out of different modules. And modules that have different depths according to the orientation of the building, but also modules that could integrate PV cells. Because the client is one of the world's largest PV producers, and therefore that building and the new skin of the building would also represent the identity of the client. But not forgetting that through the change of all the systems and the facade, that building was able to reduce energy for 40% even, like because there was less heat loss through the facade, and there could be also an energy gain through the integrated PV models. and that will give the building a longer lifetime. And for us as architects, this is exciting to see that design strategies in that scale can help to upgrade the urban environment and also the quality of our inner cities.
So in the last part, I would like to explain that with COVID-19, it gave us an enormous push to the integration of data technology in the physical domain. So not that we not did that before, but we pushed it even a bit more to make sure that technology can support the way how we can improve some of our ideas in the built environment. So like with this project, it's the ring road in Amsterdam, where we introduced a new way of thinking about how we would drive in the future. Would it be possible that in 5 to 10 years' time, when we drive more electric, that we have less noise around our highways and ring roads around the cities? Would it not be again attractive to live around the roads and the ringway specifically? Right now, it's the backyard of the city. You don't want to live close to the highway, or in a way towards the way how one lives normally at a boulevard, like we see in Paris. But maybe we make a boulevard out of this ring road where it suddenly becomes attractive again to live and work around this ring road. So what we did here was with a set of specialists, engineers and all kind of mobility specialists to look at the way how, with possibly synchronic driving in the future, that we could change the profile of the ring, and that with that we could make much more space for program and housing, particularly around this ring. And with hubs where you could park, where from the hub you could take a bike or an underground metro, a city pod, who knows, towards the city center, so that by that we could also reduce the enormous amount of traffic what we see in the inner cities. So the idea of loosening up the city center with cars, or taking the cars more or less out, and making the ring road more attractive is a double catch with the way how technology and the way how we reinterpret that with design, to give it a bit more imagination and freedom in the way how we can give cities more quality. So this idea of technology has been also lately been introduced in some of our urban plans, like this project in Helmond, where we work with the data, or an urban data platform, better to say, and where equal exchange between the people who live there, who can use these data, protected in a way so that it is not going to the bigger companies, but that we seal it off with cyber technology, or even what we say sometimes blockchaining, so that the data can stay with the people and that they can use this data for each other, so that they communicate better with each other about the production of the food, what they want to do here in this plan, or what we propose also. 60% of the food what they can produce here can be used in own use, even with the local farmers around the location. But you need to communicate with each other about it, and you need to communicate also about it in order to make sure that you create that community where I talked about. But that it also creates a condition whereby you, whenever you produce more energy, that you can sell that energy to your neighbors, who knows, so that the data stays with you and that you have also your own profits out of this data exchange. And that is not only there to interact the people more with the way how you can build up the community on this location, but particularly that we can also measure how sustainable the environment really is in the buildings, but in the outdoor environment as well. How we could create conditions whereby we could reuse the water on the location, reduce the energy, and that we maybe even sometimes don't make energy neutral environments here, but that we even produce energy in certain communities. But that we allow also investors here to come up with new ideas, and that that these learning strategies by doing, learning by doing, you could better say, could create a condition whereby over the years we could improve the environment, like with every good product, that you could interact with the idea of the environment and the technology you use here, and then over time readjust that in order to make it better. And this is where I'd like to end. UNStudio always believed in this idea of collaboration, but collaboration needs vision and focus and goals. And that's why we introduced also the company UNSense in the way how we work with UNStudio strategies, in order to see how through human-centric ideas and technology we could really strongly improve the built environment. Thank you very much.